So the first thing to be said is I'm not defending these cops. Okay, let me be clear up front. I'm not saying that the cops were right. George Floyd's the only thing in the news for the next 24 hours, unless the political activists in the mainstream media manage to drum up another racially charged incident. I don't want to talk about this story. And the reason I don't want to talk about this story, the George Floyd death, is because there's just not enough information. Now, there's enough information to say a few things. I'm going to make a few points and a few claims. And the claims I'm going to make this morning are not claims of opinion. When I tell you that the reporting on George Floyd is an act of intentional media malpractice, this is not a personal opinion. This is a statement of fact, and I will show evidence to support that claim. When I tell you that the rioting that's going on in the wake of this is an expectation held by these same political activists that call themselves journalists, and it is their objective, that is a fact. And we can base that fact on the mere evidence of its predictability. This story's bad. It's a bad arrest. It clearly did not go the way that it should have gone. And there is blame to go around. But let's be very clear about some things. And I'm not going to name names of personal. We've had a pretty heated exchange with some personal friends over this. I'm not going to name names on that, but there's one piece of it in particular that I want to address quite directly. And it is the claim that these officers should face the death penalty and be charged for murder. You should be charged for murder and face the death penalty in the George Floyd case. Let's be very clear about what murder is, about what you're saying when you say that someone has committed murder and should be sentenced to death as a result of a trial that finds them guilty of murder. The claim that you're making there is that the officer who is arguably responsible for George Floyd's death went into that situation with the intent to cause that death. You're not saying that the officer is responsible for this man's death when you say he murdered him and should be put to death under the law. What you're saying is this officer chose to kill this man on purpose, and he began the activity in which he was engaged with that premeditation as a mitigating factor in the eventual outcome. There is absolutely nothing in this case to support the claim that the officer chose to murder Floyd. Now, the officer is responsible for Floyd's death and should face consequences for that. There's an argument to be made there. That's a fair point. That's a fair claim to make. but he murdered him. I don't disagree with your opinion that he murdered him. We don't have conflicting opinions here. You're factually wrong. To make the claim of murder, you are factually wrong. Negligent homicide? Maybe.
We have Drew Daniels in the comments, and he's saying, guys, catch me up. Tell me what you're talking about. We're talking about the George Floyd situation. Normally on Thursdays, we do Totar Win Thursday.
But it just hasn't been a good week.
Well, not only that, but there's no way we could not address the George Floyd situation. So to recap, on Memorial Day, there was this happened in Minneapolis. There was a phone call made to 911 about some type of forgery in progress, and George Floyd was described as a suspect. And when I say George Floyd was described as a suspect, I don't mean that George Floyd was named as a suspect, but somebody that looked a lot like George Floyd was literally described as the person trying to commit the forgery. There's some reports say that he was trying to pass a counterfeit bill. Some reports say he was trying to pass a forged check. We don't know that. But the police come onto the scene, and Floyd initially allowed himself to be handcuffed, but then got more and more and more resistant as time went on. And it ended up with 3 cops sitting on top of Floyd. One of those cops is sitting on his neck with his knee in the back of his neck or the side of his neck, depending on how you view the video. And George Floyd later died at the hospital as a result of this encounter with the police. The reason why we're talking about it is not even necessarily because we have sympathy for the police officers, but because the narrative is evil white cops deliberately murdered this poor innocent black man, and
for no reason.
For no reason.
Let me be clear about that. The headline on this is "Black Man Murdered by Police Officer for No Reason." That's why it bothers me, because that is a lie. So let me get to this. This is the article from the New York Times, right? So, skip that. What we know about the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. This first sentence: Mr. Floyd died after being handcuffed and pinned to the ground by an officer's knee in an episode that was recorded on video by a bystander inciting condemnation and protests. Oh, so this officer just ran up on this guy and handcuffed him and pinned him to the ground for no reason at all. Now, let's do a little experiment. Control F. Arrest. Okay, the first place the word arrest appears is after 3 paragraphs of article, and it's not even part of the article. It's an insert, an advertisement where the New York Times is asking you if you have video of the arrest. So we're 3 paragraphs into this article, and it doesn't even mention that there was an arrest. And when I say it doesn't mention that there was an arrest, here's the 3 preceding paragraphs. I already read you this first one. George Floyd, 46-year-old African-American man, died on Monday after being handcuffed and pinned to the ground by a police officer's knee in an incident that was recorded on video and then incited large protests in Minneapolis on Tuesday and Wednesday. Okay, we still have a paragraph here that completely exculpates George Floyd from the situation. This paragraph still says that this man was assaulted by the police without cause. The explosive footage recorded by a bystander and shared widely on social media Tuesday led to community outrage, civil rights investigations, blah, 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 3 colleagues who were also at the scene. This this paragraph, we're 3 paragraphs into the story now, and it is still completely unprovoked assault by the police as far as this article is concerned. On Wednesday, the police department identified the fired officers, right? Well, oh, that's 4 paragraphs, and still no mention that he was a suspect in a crime. No mention of... No, they not even charitable enough to accuse the officers of lying when they claimed that he was resisting arrest. It's just omitted completely. This is journalistic malpractice. This writer has gone out of his way to tell the story. This man was murdered by police for no reason.
Drew's back in the comments.
And that's the problem I have.
He says, I totally agree with both of you. Cops these days are getting a bad rap, and it's not their fault.
Now, this does look like a bad arrest. This does look like I was saying a minute ago, if you say that this officer should be put to death because he murdered this man, you're factually wrong. Right?
But manslaughter?
Manslaughter may be fair.
Yeah.
Did the cops go overboard? Maybe. And I'm not going to say yes either. I'm not going to say yes and I'm not going to say no on that. I'm going to say maybe. If he died at the scene, that would be different. He didn't. He died in the hospital later. Now, I am not going to be surprised when the autopsy comes out and the cause of death is neither a cracked neck nor a collapsed esophagus nor suffocation. I fully expect that the cause of death is going to turn out being
Go ahead.
Anthony, you're wrong, and I'm going to address that in just a second. The cause of death is going to turn out to be a heart failure.
Anthony
he did not
says,
die. Hang on. I see that. Anthony, he did not die in front of us on camera. He died at the hospital later. So you're factually wrong there, Anthony. Anything you say just accused of a nonviolent crime, George Floyd was murdered in front of a camera. That's a false statement too. You are wrong. Anthony Floyd was placed under arrest for having committed a nonviolent crime. I'm sorry, Anthony. George Floyd was placed under arrest for having committed a nonviolent crime. And then, according to the police report, resisted arrest. So, in 6-8 months from now, that we're still going to hear that he was murdered over a bad check. It's still going to be, hang on. It's still going to be he was murdered over a bad check. That is false. The crime that he was being arrested for was a nonviolent crime. But when that turns into resisting arrest and assaulting police officers, you are no longer dealing with the question of the nonviolent crime. Now you are in the process of committing a violent crime. And that is a very, very important distinction.
And let me be clear. Okay, so Anthony's asking, did you watch the video? And Drew is back in the comments saying, so correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. Basically, we have another case of innocent black man being murdered by white cops. Clearly, there needs to be law enforcement reform in the U.S. And then Anthony just posted, that officer had his knee on his neck, and he had plenty of time to lift his knee off of his neck. Okay.
Yes, and we've already addressed this. I said this might be this is a bad arrest. This went badly. But The paramedics arrived at the scene. They recovered George Floyd alive and took him to the hospital where he died. Okay? So he died on camera in front of you, that's false. That is a false statement. Now, Anthony, I'm not going to call you a liar on this, unless you unless you add some information here. I'm not going to call you a liar here, but the statement you're making is false. It is possible. I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume that you are telling me that someone told you that they saw him die on camera and that you have not watched the video, so you, for whatever reason, are not aware that he left the scene alive in an ambulance, arrived at a hospital, and expired there. Because that's also a very important factor.
Anthony rebuts it turned to murder. He was lifeless when he was lifted to the gurney. I'm just going off what I saw. And Anthony, actually, let me tell you, I really appreciate that. And because I have family that's LEO, I tend to be very sympathetic toward police officers in these types of situations. The there's a lot of gray area here, but according to my family that's LEO, the cops definitely took things too far. There's no question in their opinion of that. But trying to assign the motive or to say that they meant to murder this guy or that somehow this is racially motivated or anything like that, no. There's also the secondary factor of something called excited delirium, and it's something that all cops are trained on. And excited delirium basically happens when you take drugs, usually really powerful drugs like crack or PCP, which elevate your heart rate. They give you immunity to pain. They give you the equivalent of super strength. You can literally punch people so hard you break your own hand, that kind of thing. And then you crash. And that crash is so rapid and so onset that it kills you. Most of us don't do cocaine, but if I did cocaine, if you did cocaine, we'd go up, we'd have a great time, we'd come down, we'd crash, we'd experience something known as the cocaine blues. And that's where it would end. But when you're in the state of excited delirium, you've pushed your body to the point to where not only do you go flying up into the stratosphere, but when you crash, you don't crash where I would crash, where you would crash. You go all the way down to the ground, and it includes heart failure. And an excited delirium state is very, very difficult to predict or deal with. Again,
or de-escalate.
My family.
The excited delirium state is also very, very difficult to de-escalate.
Yes, and my family that was LEO said, the problem with excited delirium is literally in the space of 30 seconds, you can go from somebody punching you in the face to passing out on the floor just that fast. Now, my family that also was LEO says the thing that is going to be the hardest on these cops, in particular the one with the knee on the neck, is once Floyd went limp, that's when they should have de-escalated the arrest. That, in particular, an experienced officer has been in enough fights with enough dangerous suspects where they can literally feel it when the body goes limp. So, this is going to come down to about 60 seconds that's in question in the video. The point here is not that we're trying to defend the cops. That's not it. They're in deep shit, and they probably should be in deep shit. We even spent the day yesterday with friends of ours that are highly intelligent that we trust, even attempting to defend the cops just to see how far we could push the conversation and all of that sort of thing. We are addressing this because even though this is a bad arrest that resulted in a death, it is fair to say that it's tragic that this guy he was what he was. He was a potential drug addict at the end of his rope and ended up dying over forgery. Yeah, okay, fine, that's sad. But that doesn't make it okay for the news media to say, oh my God, white supremacy, the cops just murdered black people, and now Minneapolis has riots. And that's the thing that we're really trying to address here, because that is what the media wants. They want to keep us divided. They want to keep us divided over Trayvon Martin. They want to keep us divided over Ahmaud Arbery. They want to keep us divided over Mike Brown. And let's not forget, the majority of these cases that come up, the narrative,
almost without exception,
yeah,
these cases.
almost without exception in these cases, the narrative that cop bad, black man good ends up being either entirely false, or there's enough gray area there where you wonder why you weren't told the entire story. This case is a little different because most experienced police officers that watch this video say something along the lines of, I never would have put my knee on his neck, or once he went limp, I would have taken my knee off of his neck, even if Minnesota guidelines allow for contact with the neck as part of an arrest. And Minnesota guidelines do allow for contact with the neck as part of the arrest. And even that doesn't mean, oh dear, almost, don't sneeze.
You gonna make it?
Okay, I am now. And even that doesn't mean that the cops were in the right. But it also doesn't mean that this is some racially motivated thing where everybody, like Gayle King, she cried on air yesterday. I'm so tired of this happening to black men.
It's a big damn leap to make from crack addict dies resisting arrest to let's go burn down the Target.
Yes. Now, and look, these cops have been fired. At the very least, the one that had the knee on the neck is probably going to be arrested. And, again, according to my family, that's LEO, cops should be held to a higher standard than your average citizen. And
yeah, that's fine. Arrest him, charge him, prosecute him, do the thing, right? Do the due process. Now, George Floyd got due process. He committed he was suspect of a crime. Police came with reasonable articulable suspicion to conduct an arrest. He resisted that arrest, and in the fight, even if he died at the scene, he died in a fight with cops. He died as a result of having chosen to fight cops. Right? Now, I'm all for watering the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants and patriots. Brother, my Matilda is ready to rock and roll. But if you're being charged with a crime, even if you think they're wrong, even if you know you're innocent, why fight the cops? Why not let them take you in, go through the system, get proved out, and then file a suit against them? Okay, let me see. Okay, now when his autopsy comes back, if there wasn't any drugs in his system, would you change your tone?
Okay.
Yes, in the highly improbable case that this guy who resisted arrest, fought the cops, and then died of some cause after the confrontation, after leaving the scene in the hospital, if it turns out that there were no drugs involved, then that might change the math on this. I strongly doubt that's going to be the case. I mean,
And
you said you watched the video, so I'm sure you heard somebody in the crowd shouting at the cops. He doesn't do crack anymore. He stopped doing crack. So this guy is somebody who is well known enough as a crack addict that someone in the crowd thought it was important to mention his crack addiction. So, yeah, in the very highly unlikely case that there are no drugs in his system at the autopsy, I might rethink my position on this a little bit. But
and
even
Anthony, go ahead.
just one, but even if there were no drugs in his system, I mean, you're still talking about an arrest that went bad. You're not talking about premeditated murder. There is no case for premeditated murder here. That's that's simply a false claim.
And Anthony, let me just say, we actually appreciate opposition. If we come across as inherently hostile to you, don't interpret it. Don't interpret it that way. Chris and I actually love, yield good debate.
Yeah, and I'm
Um,
running on about 3 hours of sleep and 4 pots of coffee right now. So, and and
but
guys, I tell you what, I told Cameron before we went live this morning. Look, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I want to get out in front of the Dindu narrative. I want to get out in front of this whole uh, innocent victim murdered by white cops without provocation thing, because that's false. I want to make that statement. And okay, and I'll get right back to that. I want to make that statement very clear that if you're saying that the cop should be put to death because he committed murder, you're wrong. You're making a false statement. There is no evidence to support that position. Um, I'm not saying the cops were right here. I'm saying that the the least charitable possible interpretation of the situation is utterly unsupported by the facts. Utterly unsupported by the facts. There is there is not a fact pattern that could support this was murder. Okay? And yeah, maybe the cop should be arrested. Now, he should have been fired immediately without any investigation. There's a reason that the police department has an internal affairs and the police department has procedures following an officer involved death. There's a reason that stuff is there. And one of those reasons is to root out bad cops if bad cops do their job badly, right? Now,
Anthony,
wait, I'm sorry, Cameron. I keep cutting you off, but well, frankly, it's just going to keep happening this morning. Um, there's a monitor over there. That's why I'm pointing. Anthony's. I still haven't seen any footage of him resisting. I saw the footage of his getting choked out while he's on the ground. You're absolutely correct. You haven't seen any of the footage that is exculpatory of the police officers. What you have seen is the footage that can show the least charitable possible interpretation of the situation, which is what is being actively pushed out by a press which is hostile toward the police and is actively interested in cultivating a narrative whereunder the police nationwide are afraid for their lives and their jobs to such an extent that they begin choosing not to prosecute crimes when they are committed by minorities. So
Yeah,
you will not find exculpatory evidence unless you go looking for it hard. It is not going to just show up in your Facebook feed.
yeah, we're not
Oh, and
saying
if
that
it
the
does, it'll
cops
be
were
fact
right.
checked.
Yeah, we're not saying that the cops were right. And we're not saying that it is okay that George Floyd ended up dead at the end of this encounter. What we are saying is that there is a very deliberate narrative that this is being used for, and that narrative is false. And that narrative goes back to the whole white patriarchy system of power that, basically, if you're straight, cis, male, white, Christian, you're basically the evil of the world, and you control the world. Um, that part of this is false, and it's also false to say that this was some type of premeditated murder. There's just, you do have to somewhat put yourself in the cop's position. It's really easy to put yourself in George Floyd's position. Holy shit, what would I do if I committed a nonviolent crime and suddenly I got three dudes sitting on top of me? And that's fair. But at the same time, you do have to ask yourself, what would you do in the police officer's position? You have reason to believe that the guy's on drugs. You're not real sure what's going on. Um, and and even in that, that doesn't mean that the cops didn't screw up, in particular the one with his knee on his neck, but the fact that they deliberately killed him. And so, we're done with it. We're going to take this darky off the streets. Ha ha. That's not what happened. There is a world where these cops deserve to be prosecuted and potentially convicted of some type of negligent homicide crime that does not include the larger narrative of, man, the system is racist and America's racist, and gosh, black men just keep getting murdered, and if you're a white person and you don't stand up for black people, you're part of the problem.
Now, there is some
And
racism in the system. There is a racist system in place here. Let's be very clear about that. If George Floyd were a white man, the story would not have even been reported. If the only factor here is that George Floyd were white and everything else was there, everything else happened exactly the way it happened, there wouldn't even be a story.
yeah,
This conversation would not be happening. It is only happening because it is convenient to a hostile media to paint the narrative that a black man was murdered by police without provocation. And they know damn well that in 6 months to a year, people are still going to be saying, hands up, don't shoot. He was just selling cigarettes. He was just buying Skittles. He was just jogging. He was just writing bad checks. But we know that all 5 of those statements are lies.
so Anthony says, I believe that it's being used to divide us, but being a minority myself, I understand how we are treated differently than you would. So, okay, no disrespect intended to you, Anthony. Appreciate the fact that you're a minority and you've hung with us for well over 20 minutes now for a very loaded discussion. Um,
And I definitely told Cameron before we went live that at 9 minutes we were going to start wrapping this up because I don't want to spend too much time on this topic. But hey, we've got an active audience, and if y'all are going to hang out and chit chat, we're going to chit chat with you.
but one of the things that Chris and I have discussed, and it's part of why we've started to sort of latch on to these stories. There is this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that seems to happen, in particular with young black men. He and I actually we filmed a conference that was directed toward young black men, basically a very positive version of
Oh,
Scared Straight. Um,
Okay, we're at 35 minutes and you're broaching this. Now I'm nervous for you.
okay, I'm not. And this conference was very eye-opening because to hear older black men address younger black men on the way they need to operate in the world, there were things that we heard at this conference that we literally never heard before.
Yeah,
And
alarming, eye-opening, terrifying things that I learned about the black community that had never occurred to me, that I would never have expected.
but one of the things that we observed, and okay, one of the things that we observed was that there did seem to be a culture of fear that was being passed down from the older generation to the younger generation. One of the guest speakers at this conference was even a Rockdale County sheriff, a black sheriff.
No, no, he wasn't a Rockdale County sheriff. Um, he was he was from a different county and had a different position, and he
And
was
we're
not a
going
Rockdale County sheriff. He was from somewhere else nearby, and I'm not going to say where and exactly who he was, but
to, okay,
not a
fair
Rockdale
enough.
County sheriff.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks for the fact check. But he said that if you're black in the wrong neighborhood, I will pull you over. And we just were flabbergasted
Yeah,
by this.
and I have
Like,
that on tape. I won't ever share it with you. I won't ever release it, but I have that on tape just in case. Um,
but
and I
basically, the
and
point
by
is,
just in case, I mean just in case we mention it here, and somebody comes after me, demanding that I prove it. Yeah, I've got it on tape. And the thing that he explained was the way he explained it was because I'm a black police officer, if I see you being black in the wrong neighborhood, I'm going to pull you over because I know what I was up to when I was a young black man, and so I know what you're up to. And what he's telling them is, and this is part of the broader thing that was so alarming at this conference, is the way that uh all of these adults spoke to these children at this conference, is that they seemed to be, no, they didn't seem to be, they were outright stating that in the black community, adult men expect that young men, generally not young black men, but young men of just in general, of any color, creed, whatever, that committing recreational felonies like selling a little dope, toting around a
stealing
weapon
cars.
underage, or stealing cars for fun is just stuff that young men do. And that hearing this conversation, like, we were the only white guys in the room because we were the camera crew. And the conversation that's being had, as if we're flies on the wall, we're not there, is very candid, and it's we we understand that young men are going to do what young men do, and the thing that young men do is commit recreational felonies. And this black police officer told these young men that if I see you being black in the wrong neighborhood, I'm going to pull you over because I know that the only reason you're there is because you're a young man, and that means that you're going to commit recreational felonies. And to be very
And
clear, they made it quite clear that committing recreational felonies, up to and including the occasional murder, is just something that young men do. It's just part of growing up in America.
yeah, and Anthony says basically know your place. I assume that he's referencing the police officer specifically who said if you're black in the wrong neighborhood, I'm going to
Yeah,
pull you over and
Anthony,
question you.
I'd appreciate a little clarification on that comment. I think I know what you mean. The cop is telling the boys to know their place. I think I think that's
But
what you're saying, and I think you're right.
uh, but but the broader narrative is that going back to the whole self-fulfilling prophecy thing, um, if you teach black men that, the system is racist, cops are racist, white people are racist, you are going to get screwed no matter what you do, no matter what you say. Well, gosh, that's actually a really terrible thing to teach a person. Um, Most of us, if we were dealing with a cop, even if the cop was an asshole, even if we knew the cop was wrong, we'd just take it. We'd understand that, there's this thing called habeas corpus, and worst case scenario, they literally can't hold you for more than 48 hours without some type of order from a judge. And we would understand that if they deliberately manipulated the situation to falsely imprison you, but to get a fat check from that police department, we would know
Oh
that.
yeah, that police department would fund the next Brushfire film, and that
But if
just
you
might be a movie about that police department.
but if you've been taught your entire life that the system is racist, that everything and everybody is racist, and you're going to be screwed no matter what, you are a hell of a lot more likely to be unduly resistant toward authority. Like, you're not going to win a fight against the cops. You're just not. They're going to keep calling for more backup, even if you put the first few of them down. You're not going to win that fight. So, what would motivate you to engage in that fight that is nearly unwinnable? Well, you think the system is screwed. You think you're screwed. You think everything is terrible and evil. And it goes back to this story where, even though,
Or you think that the probable outcome from your encounter is worse than risking your life to try and evade that outcome. The probable outcome is that you are so guilty that you're going to go to jail, and it's suddenly worth risking your life not to spend the rest of your life in jail for a crime you know you committed.
there's I first started to develop this theory back during all of the hullabaloo with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. Um, when Jontel Williams did her extended interview with Piers Morgan, I watched it because, it was fair to assume she was going to have the best firsthand knowledge of what was going on because she was literally on the phone with him when the encounter with George Zimmerman started. And part of what came out was that Trayvon Martin called Zimmerman a cracker. And Jontel Williams explained that in the inner city community, that cracker is not just a racial epithet. It also is a slur that is used against authority figures. You might call a security guard a cracker. You might call a cop a cracker, even if he's not a white cop or white security guard, because it specifically means certain things. And it was her opinion that, in the context of the situation, Trayvon Martin was accusing Zimmerman of being a cracker that wanted to rape him. And I sincerely believe that in the hot-headed mind, I can put myself back in 18-year-old Cameron's mind and think about how hot-headed I was at 18 years old. Well, in an 18-year-old boy, man, in an 18-year-old's mind, when you're in that hot-headed situation, and you feel like you're about to be treated unfairly by an authority figure, well, you might feel righteous anger, and you're justified by taking a swing at this man. And that's crazy because you don't hit cops, you don't hit security guards. Honestly, you don't hit anybody. That's probably the place we would start. But more so than normal, if you feel justified in hitting a cop or hitting a security guard, man, something is wrong. So, what puts you in that frame of mind? Well, you've been taught your entire life that the system is racist and it's gonna screw you over. So, if you're gonna go down, you might as well go ahead and go down for something worth going down for. Maybe you can knock out a couple of those teeth before they arrest you. But anyhow, good God, we did it 2 days in a row. Tried to do 20 and ended up doing 40.
I was trying to do 10. My plan was to do 10.
Anyhow, look, just you can think these cops are wrong
Oh,
without
and
thinking
Drew,
the
Drew,
system
I
is
just sent you a
racist.
request on Facebook. I think. I could be wrong. it, I could have sent it to someone else with your name in the area, but I'm guessing.
Anyhow, but I definitely need to walk out the door at about now for work. So
All right, brother. Um,
appreciate you guys this morning. Like, share, subscribe.
and you
You
know,
know,
often we end the show on the statement on a statement to the effect, "That's all I've got to say about that." You know, kind of a Forrest Gump joke, but there is a lot more that I will probably say on this topic. Not the George Floyd situation, but the broader problem of media malpractice, especially with result to uh, or with respect to false allegations of racially charged activities. Um, on the other side of this, honestly, if these four officers are tried and convicted of manslaughter, negligent homicide, something, it will be something short of murder. You're not gonna prove murder in this case. After this case, I think they should be. I think that they should face charges, perhaps, and go through the court. And when they do, when that's all done, let's assume that they're convicted on negligent homicide. I think that all four of these officers have a very strong case for defamation against every newspaper that ran an article that used the word murder and explicitly omitted the exculpatory information. So, I'm that's where I'm gonna finally leave it, and y'all be safe out there.
yeah, please do. Thanks for watching.
And you know, go to work if you can. Wear a mask if you're close to people, I guess, so you don't spit on them. And if you could, kind of like trying, kind of like, hey, try not to suck any dicks on your way across the parking lot. You know, try not to fight any cops on your way to the store. Just saying. Be safe. Have you seen Clerks, right?